What can we learn from the Songhai Empire? Well, the Songhai Empire has a very rich art heritage. A whole series of sculptures were found in an ancient West African city called Old Gene. The sculptures are thought to have been made by women, and they were made in female workshops. These sculptures show a mixture of naturalistic and abstract art. And therefore, it shows that people were thinking abstractly in terms of art heritage between 1000 and 1200 AD. Now that means more than 800 years ago, 700 years or more before Pablo Picasso and Modigliani. African scholars were thinking in a very modern, abstract, three-dimensional way, and it shows up in the art. Then there's the architectural heritage. Some of the medieval West African cities still exist. Timbuktu still exists, Gene still exists, Walata still exists, Agadez still exists. And many of these have their medieval 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century houses. Many of them are 2 stories, and on the second story they have indoor toilets. And the toilets then have plumbing that takes the waste from the second floor to well under the ground. And then what would happen is once people used the toilets, they would then pour hot water and pebbles down, which that mixture ends up, if you like, killing the offensive smells. Now, if you consider that if you were in medieval London and you went past someone's open window, you would have to duck. Whereas in these places, those cities, we have indoor toilets. There's also heritage in terms of government and government structure. Let me read you some of the West African governmental positions that used to exist in 16th century Songhai. We have Governor of Komina, Chief of the Summit, Superintendent over the Empire, Deputy in charge of floods, Director of the Port of Kabara, General Supervisor of the Palace, Royal Secretary, Chief of Etiquette and Protocol, Chief of Salaries, Chief of Purchasing, Chief of Punishment, Griot, Office of Engineers who was responsible for public works, Commissary of Police, Commissary of Police for Timbuktu, Generalissimo, Military Lieutenant, Military Person, Chief of Pirogues, Chief of the Flotilla, Master of the Cavalry. So we have government positions that sound very similar to what you would have in a modern civilization, including Chief of Etiquette and Protocol. Then we have other areas too. In the realm of economics, the Songhai Empire was a place that had banks. It was a place that had stock exchanges. It was a place where merchants were writing checks to other merchants. There's an account we have that survived, written by a scholar called Ibn Hawqal. He was writing in the year 951 AD, and he visits one of the West African cities called Aldegast and witnesses a merchant writing another merchant a check for 42,000 golden dinars. So we've got banks, stock exchanges, exchange rates, checks. The things that you'd expect in a modern commercial economy. There were 4 types of currency. People were paid in gold, gold coins, cowrie shells, and in iron. And iron was sold as a pound of iron, half a pound, a quarter. And the result then, with these types of currencies, you then have to have an exchange rate to connect the 4 different types of currencies. These kind of things happened, and a concern for controlling for price inflation. That appears in the documentation. That's why the royals like to keep control over the supply of gold. If gold was released too plentifully into the market, it would cause price inflation. There's other things too. Richard Jobson, in his book, The Golden Trade, visits the Gambia region and remarked that the people of the region ate once per day, believing that to eat once per day preserves their health. The Nation of Islam, their founder, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, has a very similar teaching about the link between eating once per day and preservation of health. Now, scientists in our times believe that if one eats what's called a calorie-restricted diet, calorie-restricted diets have been shown to improve the lifespan of animals. So if you feed a rat 2/3 of the diet that a rat would ordinarily eat, it preserves the life. So the question has been raised, well, does that work with humans? And about 2 years ago, I believe, the BBC did a documentary on something called the fast diet, also known as the 5-2 diet, where people eat naturally 5 days per week and fast 2 days per week. And that is really a modernized version of what was being taught and practiced in the Songhai Empire when Richard Jobson was there.